The strange and paranormal can happen anywhere at any time. Tonight I will be telling 5 stories detailing different scenarios in separate settings. From a young man on a late night drive, to a job delivering mysterious luggage, a glass eye off the dark web, an entity haunting dreams, and a shadow person with a stalking problem. A huge thank you to all of tonight's authors for making this video possible. Remember, you can send in your own story to rylhstories@gmail.com. Likes and comments are always appreciated if you enjoy. Subscribing if you're new is of course as well. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. This was it, the moment I had been working toward for the last 2 years. I gritted my teeth and turned the key. With a prolonged cranking and a fit of coughing, the engine flared to life, sputtered, then evened out. I sat back in my seat and released the breath I had been holding. It lived. My first car, gifted to me by my deadbeat father, had been a work in progress since my 16th birthday. It had been more out of spite than anything else that had led to the endless nights spent busting my knuckles and watching the engine come together bit by bit. I chuckled to myself. They might make fun of me for learning most of it on YouTube, but it worked. My first car, well, truck really, rusted and beat up, the seats torn, not even a stereo in the damn thing, but it was mine, and I had earned it. Now it was time for a test drive. I jumped out of the truck, excitement making me giddy. Greased up jeans, sweat stained, my stomach gnawing from the lack of food eaten in the final rush to complete the job, and all I could think about was taking this beauty for its first ride. A quick wash at the sink, just enough to get the worst of the stains off my hands, and I was rolling up the garage door and reversing the rust bucket, for so was her name, out into the street for her maiden voyage. Seamlessly, the gears engaged, and I began to roll forward down the street. I thumped my seat and bounced, ecstatic at the feel of the tires rolling across the pavement. So far so good. The engine was still running smoothly and seemed to be accepting the increased speed, so now it was time to fill the tank and put some miles on it. Half an hour later, cruising on a full tank of gas, the rust bucket and I were on our way out of town, heading north to loop around the county. It was a small county, so even though it was almost midnight, I should still be home early enough to prevent my mom from worrying. Arizona is a beautiful state. Something a lot of people don't know. Most think it's just a bunch of cactus and sand. Something about that old crafted stereotype persists. But in reality, it's huge open skies with thousands of stars visible once you get away from the city lights. Perfect for driving without interruption. It was a good while later before the excitement started to fade, and I began to take notice of something other than my engine, which was running well but beginning to smell hot. I was pretty far out and hadn't noticed at the time, but now began to realize there hadn't been another car on the road for a number of miles. It was very dark out. I was right about in the middle of the 40-mile stretch between towns. Nothing around except the low rocky hills and scrub brush. Shit, I muttered, patting around the bench seat for my phone. The temperature gauge was beginning to inch past the optimal zone. I was beginning to get nervous. I could go longer, and I could always stop for a while to let the engine cool down. But this was an admittedly poor spot to stop. These wide stretches tend to have very bad cell phone service. If something were to happen, I don't think I could call for help. A sharp squeal and the engine sputtered, the drive belt slipping on the pulleys. A sure sign things were about to reach critical point. I braked hard and pulled off onto the shoulder. A narrow strip of gravel before the miles upon miles of brush. Cutting the power, the engine sputtering to a stop. I bailed out and lifted the hood. Steam was whistling out the radiator cap, and the belt smelled of hot rubber. I ran my hands through my hair, trying not to panic. Not my truck, I thought. I put so much work into it. Unless I wanted to do serious, irreparable damage to it, I was going to be stuck here for a while. I thumped my fist against the fender and leaned my head against the lip of the hood, listening to the engine bubble and hiss, aware now of just how quiet it was. I realized why. There are plenty of animals in the high desert, and they come with a huge variety of noises and habits. It was my truck with a sudden stop and my ensuing commotion that had startled any nearby creatures into a wary silence. Nonetheless, with only the wind and the very faint light from the stars up above. I was very, very aware of just how alone I was. The best bet right now was to just chill in the truck. It was a big enough cab that I could almost lie down comfortably and wait. Give it maybe half an hour, and I could start the truck back up and keep going. 20 miles through the winding hills, and I could at least be in a town big enough to get a tow truck called. My truck could do it. I had put the work into her. I knew she could do it. I just had to wait a little bit. I left the hood open to allow more air into the engine bay, hoping to speed up the cooling process, and climbed back in the cab, shutting the headlights off to conserve battery life. I checked the door locks and leaned back. Time to wait. Silence aside from the ticking of the engine beginning to cool. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and set the timer for 30 minutes. My stomach rumbled, the sound startling in the silence. And I began to realize just how long it had been since I had last eaten. I think it had been lunchtime at work. After closing time, all my thoughts had been on the truck. The same truck that now sat here on this abandoned stretch of 2-lane highway, with me stuck inside. I sighed and opened my phone. Maybe playing a game would pass the time faster. I looked up suddenly from my phone. The hapless bird launching off course and completely missing the pig's fortifications. What was that? I didn't know if I had heard anything or if it was just my imagination making me think I had heard the gravel outside shifting. I shut the phone off and closed my eyes, counted to 10, and opened them again, waiting for my retinas to process the darkness outside my truck. Nothing moved. No sound was made. On the horizon, the small sliver of moon was rising, nowhere near enough to see anything farther than 10 feet from the truck. What the fuck? I whispered, losing my mind, hearing things. I sat silently in the cab, straining my eyes and ears. No sound but my own very quiet breathing. That shouldn't be right though. There should be other noises too. I'd definitely been sitting here long enough. Night birds and coyotes at the very least. But there was nothing. Too weird, I thought to myself. This isn't right. Glancing at my phone, I saw that I had almost 10 minutes left on the timer. I tried peering into the engine bay through the little gap between the hood and the bottom of the windshield, like I could feel the temperature from behind the glass. I scoffed at myself. Okay, now you're just being dumb. Suck it up. There's nothing weird going on. I sat up and flipped the headlights on, illuminating the area in front of me, and catching a brief flash of something up ahead as it slid off the pavement into the trees. My heart stopped, my stomach clenched, and my palms immediately began to sweat. What the hell was that? I knew of a lot of different animals that resided in the high desert. There was nothing like that here. I couldn't even tell what it was that I had glimpsed. All I knew was that nothing should have moved like that. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. I had to get out of the truck. The hood was open. I couldn't drive like that. I might be able to drive the truck for a while. It should be cool enough to at least start moving. Something was better than nothing. My breath hitched and I reached for the lock, forcing my suddenly cold fingers to grip the switch. I leaned forward and looked hard, trying to make my eyes see more than what was showing. I knew what I had seen. Or did I? Moving fast, I threw open the door and leapt out, sliding around the front of the hood and slamming it down. I heard something behind me, heavy, fast. It was moving toward me. I squeaked in terror and threw myself back into the truck, knocking the shit out of my shin in the process, and slammed the door, cranking the engine before the door was even closed. Praise be to whatever deity there is. All of them even. The truck roared to life instantly. The coolant temp gauge was higher than I would have liked, but at this point, I did not care. Something was out there, and I could not stay here any longer. I didn't see anything in front of the truck, but I knew it was close. The noise from the truck may have startled it. I threw the shifter into first, and almost stalled the engine trying to get moving. My breath was sawing in and out of my throat, and my hands were slipping on the wheel. I looked in my rearview mirror and saw it, standing on the very edge of the gravel. It watched me. Fumbling, I grabbed my phone off the seat and dialed 911. Even the shitty service out here should be enough. 1 bar is all I needed. 911, what is your emergency? Hello? Yeah, I'm heading east on Highway 70 towards Duncan. My truck is having issues running. I think there's something out here with me. I don't know what, but it's following me, and I don't think I'll make it to the next town. Are you alone? Yes, it's just me. I'm really afraid. Try not to panic. What was the last mile marker that you saw? I don't know. I wasn't paying attention, but I think I'm almost halfway there. Alright, please keep an eye out. I'm dispatching a unit to your location. The line started to cut out. No, please, don't leave me. I don't know what is out there. I need you to stay calm. Wait. A unit is on the way and should... Wait. I see a mile marker just ahead. The call cut off. I swore and threw the phone on the seat, glancing in the rear view. Nothing but empty road behind me, but that meant little. Meanwhile, the needle was creeping back into the red. I slammed my fist against the steering wheel, reducing my speed. I began to try and eke out as much from the engine as I could. Maybe 20 miles out of town, hopefully less. No sign of lights though. They were successfully blocked out by the hills. The needle was now fully in the red, and the truck was starting to protest. I turned the heater up and opened the vents. Anything, please, I thought. Don't die on me now. Another mile marker crept by, and just the other side of it, a bang, and a jet of steam shot out of the sides of the hood. The belt began squealing and the truck died. No! I scrambled out and lifted the hood, recoiling at the rush of sweet-smelling smoke that rushed into my face. Coolant was dripping down the block and puddling on the asphalt. The belt was hanging, completely thrown. No! I punched the side of the truck twice and got back in. Please start, I begged. The engine cranked and cranked, but would not catch. I kept at it, hoping for a miracle on this dark and silent road. Eventually, the battery wound down and the engine turned slower. Then, not at all. And I was left alone, in the dark, in the silence. A few minutes later, the last bit of battery was spent, and the dim glow of the headlights died. I sat in the cab with the door open, fear sweat making me shiver. My breath caught and hitched as I fought back the panic. Nearby, a single owl hooed and fell silent. I shut the door and locked it, then looked at my phone. A whole 15 minutes had passed since I had begun to drive away from my first stop. If the emergency dispatcher was to be believed, there should be an officer coming along soon. 20 miles was not long to drive when in a properly running vehicle. Drawing my knees to my chest, I huddled on the seat and gripped my cell phone. No bars. I was in a dead spot. All I could do was wait. It's been almost 10 minutes since my poor truck committed suicide. I'm not sure if it was something that I did wrong, or just an already existing fluke that I never discovered. Doesn't matter much either way. I'm stuck here, and I'm pretty sure whatever first found me has found me again. I heard a sound. No other animals. Just that one sound. I don't know how it moves so fast, or maybe it's the only one. God, there's a horrifying thought. The truck shifted, just a little bit, but it wasn't me. I won't look up. I can hear it outside. I can feel it looking at me. I won't lift my head. Maybe they'll get here soon. Maybe it won't be too late for me. Stupid truck. This was supposed to be a celebration. Oh God. I hope they get here soon. My phone goes off. The truck lurches, and whatever is outside is now trying to get in. Please get here soon. So, I'm a guy in his early 30s with a 4-year degree and a poor temperament. There isn't much in the way of career options out there for someone like me, but I do what I can to get by. I live alone in a month-to-month studio apartment with a communal bathroom that everyone who lives on my floor uses. Great. And I embraced the new gig economy as soon as it started in my area. I use an old smartphone to download apps that are work-related, but it does the trick for now. I hunt for jobs on Craigslist every day. When I have a few minutes of downtime, I eat like crap, I sleep like crap, and what few romantic prospects I've ever had in my life were few and far between a very long time ago. I worked at 2 or 3 jobs, I can't quite remember, in my field of choice for a grand total of 2 years. The longest job that I've ever held beyond that was as a pizza guy for 3 miserable years. I've seen some strange things in my time as a delivery boy. I've walked up to a door, answered by a naked person, or sometimes, naked people. I've nearly been mugged a few times driving around Wilmington. Hell, there was one time I talked a guy out of suicide. He was a good tipper. But all of those things pale in comparison to the last gig job I took. Well, it wasn't so much the job, but the last delivery that I ever made for it. I had been hired by a baggage carrier service in Philadelphia. They put out a Craigslist ad, and I managed to email a resume to them from my phone. They're located in Essington, PA, right outside of the town of Chester, Philadelphia International Airport, and the Delaware River. The pay seemed good. Not great, but the hours were good. I worked second shift, 2 to 10 p.m., which allowed me to get some sleep after my paper route. The job involved driving a crappy white Ford Econoline van to the airport and stop at each baggage office at each terminal. Once there, we went to each airline's lost baggage office to grab what hadn't made it off the flight for whatever reason. After all of the lost bags were collected, we drove the van back to the shop and unloaded it, all based on routes in Jersey, the Philadelphia suburbs, and Delaware. Even though I'm from Delaware, yes, it's a real state that exists, I never actually got to take the Delaware route. Often, I was relegated to Jersey. After the bags were stored, we used the lost baggage app to cross-reference each bag to our own delivery code so that the passengers of the airline would know that we had their bag, that we were bringing it to them, and what our personal vehicles looked like. What the app didn't tell them, something that they never seemed to understand anyway, is that we often took 10 to 15 bags at a time. Thus, their bag was part of a route, and everyone had a window of 4 to 6 hours to receive their bag. When I started the job, I figured that people would be grateful enough just to have their stuff back, but that was never the case. They gave me dirty looks. I received nasty phone calls from them, and they gave me every sob story under the sun, but I never received a single thank you or a tip for any form of gratitude. I had half a mind to say to these people, "I'm sorry, sir. I'm sorry, madame. This is my job, and I do the best that I can at it. I'm sorry that your Samsonite is one of 15 bags, and I had to stop for gas as well. If that bag is worth less than your time, perhaps I could have chucked it into the Delaware River, thus ridding us both of this inherent pain-in-the-ass suitcase." I hate people almost as much as I hate July. But this little tale of mine isn't about any of those ungrateful people. This is a story about the last bag I ever delivered. I had only been with the company for about 3 weeks. Doing any form of manual labor in Philadelphia in July is humid death, and the sun stays out until about 9 in the evening. But this was the only job I could immediately find. One particular day, I was getting ready to take the Jersey route, a total of 8 bags that day, when I got called into the office by Heather, the owner of the company. She told me that Frontier has just received another bag, and they begged us to take it. "Where's it going?" I asked her. "Tom's River," she replied, cringing a little bit as she braced for my reaction. Tom's River was only about 2 hours from the carrier service. That's all. Included with my other 8 bags, why would I be so angry about having to drive 2 hours out of my way? "Get the hell out of here," I immediately yelled back. "It's a lot of money," she snapped back at me. "You'll make $120 off this bag alone." I rubbed my chin inside, pacing in the office and thinking hard about the delivery. I must have given myself away because when I looked back at her, she had a slight quiver of a smile on her lips. "Well, I guess I don't have much of a choice," I told her. "I'll head back to the terminal. Don't get any ideas about making something like this a regular thing, by the way. This is a one-time only favor that I'm doing for you." She scoffed. "I've heard that before, Richard. Anyway, when you get back to the office, I won't be here. I'll see you tomorrow." I took my own Camry to the terminal this time. I hated that damn van anyway, and it just made sense to drive my own car. I parked outside with the blinkers on in the pickup lane. I let the nearby parking authority and state police know who I was with, and ran inside to the Frontier baggage claim. The woman behind the desk, Gina, was on the phone when I got there. I'd met Gina before, and she smiled as I made my way to the desk. She held up a finger to me and said goodbye into the phone, and hung up the receiver. Then she turned to me. "Hey, Ricky," she said to me cheerfully. "I'm glad you could make it. I just got off the phone with Heather." I ran my hand through my hair. "Tom's River? Gina? Really?" She threw up her hands. "I'm sorry. They just send them to me and I call you guys. I told my supervisor how expensive this bag would be, and he didn't care. So, here we are." "I know," I replied. "I'm sorry. Are there any special instructions with the bag?" She sucked air through her teeth. It's a sound so vile that I'll never forget it. "Well," she started, but then trailed off. "Gina?" I replied sternly. Without saying a word, her eyes darted to the corner of the office. I whipped around and stared for a moment, saw it in the corner, then I threw my arms up in disgust. This bag was old. Blue pleather jet flights, brand piece of crap. Well, most of it was blue. It yellowed in a few places, and some of the pleather chipped off. It was from the 1950s, before rolling luggage was a thing. So this was just a handle suitcase. I turned back to look at Gina. "I don't know," she said to me apologetically. "We ran it through the x-ray machine, and there's nothing but clothes in it. The name, address, and phone number are on the slip. That's the best I can do, Ricky. I'm sorry." I looked down at the suitcase and pulled the tag off. I pulled out my phone and called the phone number on the suitcase tag. It rang twice, and I swear to God it did the strangest thing afterward. There was a click on the other end, like someone picked it up, but there wasn't any ambient noise in the background. No one said hello. No one breathed into the microphone, and I didn't hear any noises in the background. I didn't even hear the static on the landline itself. There was nothing. I hung up and tried calling back, but this time I got a message that the number was out of service, which made even less sense. I looked down at my phone to make sure I had the number right, and then I looked back at Gina again. She started to say something, but her phone rang. She said her greeting, and then shrugged at me and mouthed sorry, and then she turned back and walked into the office behind the desk. I took a breath and bent down to get the bag. I nearly blew out every muscle in my body when I tried to lift it by the handle. My back felt like it strained muscles in 3 different places. What the hell is in this thing? Cement? I asked myself as I worked to massage the pain out of my lower back. What did Gina say was in the bag? Nothing but clothes? Not knowing what else to do, I notified a security guard that I was leaving the bag in the office. I walked down to the Delta Airlines hub to grab their baggage cart. They were always jackasses, as they used a different recovery service, and they usually mocked my company in the few times I had to deal with them. They always made me leave my ID with them, when I didn't really have a choice this time. All of the other baggage offices were closed by now. I entered Delta and eyeballed the smirking representative. With some coaxing, eventually the rep let me use the baggage cart. When I made it back to Frontier, the lights in the office were still on, but there was no sign of Gina. I readied the cart next to the bag. I placed myself to pick it up, using my legs this time, and I put my hand on the handle. When I pulled, I flew backwards and landed on my back, carrying the bag with me as it landed on my stomach, nearly taking the wind out of my lungs. It weighed about as much as a feather this time. I rolled onto my feet and looked around to make sure that no one saw me make an ass out of myself. Then, I looked down at the suitcase. Did someone tamper with it when I went to get the baggage cart? I grabbed the handle and tried again, this time with only a little force. Yep, it was just as light this time. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes in that moment. What happened with this bag? Am I fatigued? I asked myself, trying to rationalize things. I rubbed my chin and grabbed the bag again, and then I tossed it onto the baggage cart. As dumb as that may seem, I went out of my way to get the damn cart, so I was determined to use it. I wheeled the cart out to my Camry, and I popped the trunk, which was already weighed down by the other bags. I was burning daylight now, and I had to get out on my Jersey route, so I just tossed it in and ripped the tag off to keep with the other tags. I shifted them around so that the old jet flight bag was last. Thus, it would be the last delivery on the route. I closed my trunk and grabbed the baggage cart so I could take it back to Delta. I started the Camry and drove up 95 North and over the Walt Whitman Bridge. As I drove towards Camden County, New Jersey, I noticed a smell in the air. It was a faint but foul aroma. I chalked this up to me simply driving through New Jersey and programmed Google Maps towards the first destination on my route. The route was as scenic as it always was, with stops in Mount Laurel, Cherry Hill, Glassboro, and Vineland. The office made sure that I would beat my car to death in the July humidity with as much backtracking as I usually had to do. Yes, this is the way we did things. In order of distance from the office and time received as opposed to some straight line during delivery. One by one, I dropped the bags off until I was left with only one, the jet flight bag. I programmed the street address to the destination in Toms River into my phone's GPS and started up 295 north from where I was. It would take another hour and a half to get there as I expected. As I passed through Trenton, I noticed the smell again and began to think about it. It had fluctuated between pungent and faint, but it never left the Camry. Not only did the smell linger, but now it was getting overbearing. I looked at each shoulder for cops, and I accelerated faster. I raced towards Toms River, that I could drop this damn bag off and call it a night. My stomach was killing me with hunger pains. But I was close to the exit for the town now, and according to maps, I was about 30 minutes away altogether. I noticed that I was taking shallow, measured breaths at this point, and that I was starting to get dizzy. I wake myself up as I slowed down to check the tag again. The name on the tag was Richard Higgins. And other than a phone number that didn't seem to work correctly, the tag showed the Toms River address, a barcode, and an IATA number. I wish Gina would have been able to give me more information. Like if Frontier had ever even spoke with Gloria, or if I could just leave the suitcase on the porch and wave the signature. But that was the nature of the beast with this job. Some pop punk son from my high school days blared from the radio as it came back from a commercial break. I smiled and sang along a little bit until I had to look at my GPS again to make sure I was still within spitting distance. I turned the radio down to plan my route in my mind. Richard. What in the goddamn hell? I screamed out, nearly swerving into a car in the lane to the right of me. The shock sent me into a panic while I tried desperately to move to the right side shoulder. It had been the sound of an elderly woman. Well, kind of. I mean, that's the best way to describe what I heard. There was something off about that voice. Something I couldn't figure out while I was parked on the shoulder and trying to calm myself down. I thought to myself, what was that? And how did it know my name? With the Camry in park, I got out as fast as I could. Someone blared their horn at me as they nearly took my driver's side door off. I walked around to the front of the car to try and calm down. I stared into the back seat through the windshield, but there was nothing there except for my discarded Burger King wrappers. I opened my door again and popped the trunk, then made my way around to the back of the car. The jet flight bag was still in the trunk. I grabbed its handle and pulled it out, half expecting to throw my back out again. But it was as lightweight as an old bag filled with pajamas should have been. I put the bag back in, shut the trunk lid, and took a few deep breaths. Everything is fine. You're fine. You're just tired and working too hard. I told myself, if anyone needs a vacation, it's you, Rick. When I got back in my car, I noticed something good, actually. The smell was gone, but its absence, for some reason, only served to make me more paranoid than I was when I pulled over. I should have been able to locate that smell. Its sudden absence didn't mean that the problem was gone. That put me on edge. Behind the wheel of the Camry, I sat in the driver's seat for a moment, hesitant to pull out into traffic. I looked over at my phone and the GPS map on it. I was only about 15 minutes away from the location now, which gave me a little relief. I shifted into drive and merged back into traffic. I finally wound up at my last delivery. It was 9:30 by that time, which made me curse myself in frustration. That always bothered me about people who complained I was taking too long to get to their houses with their bags. It was never my desire to drive around till 11 o'clock or midnight with their bags just so I could end up back at my shitty apartment at 3 in the morning. I shook my head at that thought and checked the bag tag again. 1260 Landing Way, Toms River, New Jersey. Staring at the sign for Landing Way, I pulled my car down the street, checking the numbers on the houses as I drove so I could find 1260. I pulled close to 1256, and I noticed that there weren't any other houses on that side of the street. and about half a mile down the street, there was a dead end sign. I pulled up beside 1256 and gauged the situation. My GPS notified me that I had arrived, but at the time, I didn't think that was possible. I shifted to park and looked at what was supposed to be 1260 Landing Way. This is supposed to be the part of the story where I lock eyes with a cliché of some kind. I figured I would pull up to the Bates Mansion or Ed Gein's house or something of that effect. I wish I could write about things like boarded up windows, gothic additions, or someone looking at me through a curtain. If I would have seen any of those things, maybe that day would make a little more sense to me now. But when I looked out my driver's side window, there was nothing. There was no house at all. From the car, I even shined my phone's flashlight on the land to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. Don't get me wrong. It looked like there may have been a house on that land at some point, but that point was a long time ago. Certainly not that day in July. There was the remnants of what looked like a driveway, not counting the tall grass that grew out of the cracks. The sidewalk kept going from 1256 to the dead end, and there was nothing out front except an old, rusted fence with a gate that was maybe 3 feet high. Well, there was a part of that fence anyway. The fence only covered about 4 feet of the land in either direction. The gate hung poorly off of the hinges, what was left of it anyway. The grass was overgrown. It looked almost like a couple of odd, concrete structures growing in a field. This made me scratch my head for a minute or two. I turned the flashlight on my phone off and looked at the app. I turned the overhead lamp on in the Camry while I gauged the situation. The GPS and app both told me I was at the correct address. I breathed a long and deep sigh and got out of the car, leaving my keys in the ignition. I turned my flashlight back on and slowly walked towards the driveway, I guess. I looked around using the light and made my way further into the parcel of land. The hair on the back of my neck then stood up, which didn't help the fact that I already knew something wasn't right. When I made my way to the top of the driveway, long cracked and worn and being reclaimed by the earth beneath it, I looked to my right, and I was glad I walked up the driveway slowly. There was a foundation to the right that resembled a basement. There were footsteps and columns, a couple of old appliances that were rusted through and through, sat down in the pit, surrounded by a few puddles of standing water. There was a washer, a dryer, and a water heater. The water heater was lying down on the ground horizontally. I then noticed a furnace nearby as well. I took a deep breath and carefully made my way back to my car. I broke into a sprint and opened the trunk. I tried the phone number on the tag again. This time, the line was not dead. It rang 3 times and someone picked up. I heard heavy breathing on the end of the line and alarm bells went off in my head. I managed to stammer out a weak, "Hello?" "Hello, Richard," I heard again, and it cut through my ears and down my spine. I dropped the phone on the ground and popped the trunk open with my key. I grabbed the handle on the jet flight bag, and of course, it again felt like there were cinder blocks in the damn thing. I felt dizzy, and right away noticed that the foul odor had come back, but instead of being localized to my car, it was all around me, as I tried desperately to get the bag out of the trunk. With what strength I had left in my legs, I pulled the bag out and threw it on the asphalt behind me. The latches popped open, and the contents spilled out. Like Gina had told me, all that was in there was an old nightgown and slippers. I didn't spend long processing the contents of the bag. I just grabbed the phone off the street and made a break for the driver's side door. I noticed that the call was still going on the phone, and I shut it off. I got in the car and turned the key in the ignition. Thankfully, I was 2 for 2 against cliches, and the Camry started right up. I threw it in gear and blasted back down Landing Way. Within a few moments, I was back on 295 heading south. I tried to avoid police when I noticed the smell was overpowering now. Why was it so bad? I ditched the bag and everything. It clogged my nostrils and made me dizzy again. As I gasped for air, it came from the back seat. "Richard." Fury replaced fear as I pulled over to the shoulder and popped the trunk while my car idled. I stomped to the rear of the car and threw the trunk lid open. Sure enough, there it was, sitting in the space above the spare tire compartment. It was the jet flight bag. The damn jet flight bag. I have no idea how, but I was still in possession of it. Oh well, I guess I was 1 for 3 in horror cliches tonight. I yelled, I just looked to the New Jersey night sky and yelled as loud as I could. I yelled so loud that the cars driving by slowed down and nearly rear-ended each other. I grabbed the handle on the jet flight bag, which of course felt like grabbing a boulder with a handle, and I pulled it to the mouth of the trunk. I was able to get it over and dump it on the side of the road. Again, the locking mechanism snapped open, and the contents of the bag poured out. There were photographs now, old photographs, some in frames, and some loose prints just lying on the road. Where in the hell did the nightgown and slippers go? This didn't explain the weight fluctuation to the bag at all. Why did the damn thing feel like a boulder sometimes? I looked down at the photos. They had burn marks on them. Most of them did. Some were signed on the corners, and some were burned beyond recognition. I picked up a few of the legible ones. Mostly, the photos were of family. There was a husband, a wife, and 2 kids. I'd have to estimate that the kids were ages 10 and 12, a boy and a girl, with the boy being the older one. The man wore a business suit with a fedora, and the wife, who kind of was a looker, wore a contemporary dress of the late 50s, or early 60s, if I had to guess. Based on the color tone of the photo, I guess that the pictures were taken around that time frame as well, maybe later. A few things about the photos were off though. There were a few words scrawled on them in green marker, from another language, except it wasn't marker. Come to think of it, it was wax. Candle wax. I noticed something else in the photos too. There was a house in every photo. It was a small, brick ranch house, and the family was standing in front of it. The surrounding land looked exactly like Landing Way. I took a closer look at the photo. In his left arm, he held his wife, and in his right hand, it was a blue jet flight suitcase. Right there on the highway, I started looking feverishly through other photos. One of the photos showed the man and a woman, a completely different woman, in bed, taken through the window of a completely different house. There was another photo that showed candles on the wooden floor of a dark room. Green candles. There were 5 of these candles to be specific, and in the middle was a fedora and the suitcase. The next photo showed the ranch house on Landing Way on fire. There were figures in the windows of this photograph. All of them had their hands on the glass. 6 pairs of hands, and 4 of them belonged to children. I dropped the photo I was looking at when I heard my name again. It was different this time. This time, the voice was deep, even guttural. I slammed the trunk shut, leaving the jet flight bag and the pictures on the street, and ran to the driver's seat. I slammed my door shut, found my key, and tore off the shoulder back into traffic. I was trying to outrun the smell in this damn bag, and whatever memories were attached to it. I hoped that escape was possible. The smell only became stronger as I made it to Trenton. It was then that I made the mistake of looking in the rearview mirror. I saw her eyes first. They had no detail to them. They were just these damned yellow orbs sunk into black sockets. She was old. At least she looked ancient anyway. Her hair, what was left of it, was gray and stringy. She had a grin. I think it was a grin. Her teeth were a disgusting shade of brown. She was completely nude. I don't know why I'm thinking about this now, but maybe that's why the nightgown was in the suitcase. I'm not sure what bags get inspected upon traveling down to hell. Her skin was pale white, all wrinkles but no veins. In retrospect, maybe she didn't have any blood left in her. Hell, maybe that's what she wanted from me. This time, I watched her mouth open, but she didn't say my name. Frankly, I don't know what in the hell she said. Maybe she said in that moment came out backwards and deep. Yeah, her words really came out backwards, just like a tape being rewound at regular speed. Sweat poured down my brow as I tried to stay on the road while keeping an eye on her in the rearview mirror. I had to swerve as a car hit the brakes in front of me suddenly, and this was a mistake. She had an opportunity and took it. All at once, I found bony, cold fingers wrapped around my neck. She dug her long, dead fingernails into my jugular, and squeezed and squeezed. The smell was worse than ever now. As I gasped for my last bits of oxygen, I started to see trails and my vision faded out. I had one chance. I checked out of the corner of my eyes to see if there was a car to my right. The lane was empty, so I jerked the wheel with all my might in that direction. I swung the Camry over 2 lanes to traffic with cars honking and drivers screaming at me as the car cut. I wasn't trying to pull over though. I jammed my foot on the gas as I barreled towards the guardrail. I cursed myself for not wearing a seatbelt as my body jerked forward and then from side to side upon impact. Glass shattered everywhere. All of the console lights in the car came on at once as the radio abruptly cut off. I felt a fire run through my spine and my leg and my arm, jolting me back into consciousness. Warm blood caressed my face, starting at my forehead and running down my cheek. But most importantly, my neck was free from her hands. I seized the opportunity and jerked the driver's side door open. I stumbled out of the car and to the ground. I crawled past the car over to the rail itself. With my last bit of consciousness, I looked at the front of my poor Camry. The front end was crumpled in on the right side, and the headlight was completely smashed in. The windshield had shattered, and glass from the windows was all over the place. There was fluid leaking from the undercarriage. I then cursed myself one last time for not having collision coverage, and I slipped into blackness. I awoke sometime later in a hospital bed in Camden, which would definitely not have been my first choice. I was in traction with casts on my left arm and leg. I used my right hand to feel my face, which had gauze all down the right side. I let out a sigh when I realized my predicament. But then, I took in a hearty breath. I'd take the smell of a hospital over the smell of death and decay any day of the week. The coming days were a mess. A New Jersey state trooper came by and presented me with a ticket for reckless driving, despite my story. There were enough eyewitnesses at the scene to describe the lane-jumping magic act I had to put on. I also got a bill for the impounding of my poor little Camry, and for damages done to the guardrail on impact. I think Heather texted me about the bag once. I simply texted back, "I won't be delivering bags anymore." To which, I never received a response, a visit, or anything else from her for that matter. The few friends I once had never showed up or even called me to ask how I was doing. My family hates me. I'm not sure if they even know where I live, but it kind of hurt that Heather didn't show up, or any of the other guys from the courier service. It was only me, lying in traction, alone in my thoughts. I was diagnosed with a broken femur, a fractured forearm, lower back trauma, and head trauma. I had to go through about 6 weeks of medication and then rehabilitation. Well, I only was able to do 4 weeks of that, thanks to my liability policy that came to about $15,000. And then they cut my casts off, and I was booted from the hospital with nothing but a pair of crutches. My leg never healed properly, and I have a limp now. I used that money I had in the bank to take an Uber down to the airport. I picked up my last check from the bag service. When I came, Heather luckily wasn't there. No one else would talk to me, which is fine. I don't have anything to say to them. If they weren't there for me when I went to the hospital, what was I going to tell them now? I wouldn't be able to drive again until I could get to New Jersey for my reckless driving hearing. I couldn't drive for a while anyway. I didn't have a car anymore. I doubt I'll be driving for a long time. I've been home for 2 months now. I saw a 90-day notice to evict slide under my door the other day. I let my phone shut off. I put everything I could into my internet and electric. I'd rather watch YouTube videos all night on my laptop, desperately trying to stay awake, than talk to anyone, and who would call anyway. But at least that jet flight bag is gone, the smell is gone, those damned yellow orb eyes that occupy my rearview mirror are gone. She's gone. So at least I'll figure it out again someday soon, and rejoin society. Sometimes at night, I think I hear that soft, ancient voice call out my name. Richard. I tell myself it's just the wind outside. I lost my left eye when I was 7 years old. It was a stupid way to lose an eye, but luckily, most people tend not to ask how I lost it. I think the majority worry it might be insensitive. It's not a story I like to tell. Not because it's upsetting or brings back bad memories. I just feel embarrassed by it. Growing up, my brother and I were obsessed with Robin Hood, the outlaw of Sherwood Forest, who would take from the rich and give to the poor. I'm not going to pretend this heroic savior of the poor was our hero because of his good deeds. We simply liked him because of his legendary skill with a bow and arrow. Our father, a keen gardener, had lots of bamboo sticks all piled up beside the shed, which he would tie plants to, in order to stop them from drooping when they grew. It was my brother's idea to take one and attach a length of string to both ends to create a bow. I thought he was an absolute genius. When we had finished making the bow, we made an arrow, simply by using a handsaw to carve a small groove into one end of an arrow-sized piece of bamboo, which would act as a nest for the string to sit. "I'm first," my brother said. "No," I cried. "It was my idea, so I get to shoot first." And that was that. At one end of the garden, there was a little wall which surrounded one of my father's flower patches. Upon the wall, we placed an empty plastic bottle to be used as our target. My brother, of course, then took the first turn, missing wildly and falling far short of the bottle on the wall. Next it was my go, and I almost missed. It took about an hour before we had both knocked the bottle off the wall once. "Right, now you stand in the middle, and I'll shoot over your head at the target." Another genius idea by my brother. I didn't argue. I thought it was a cool thing to do, and if I did it, then my brother would have to let me have a go at shooting over him. I don't believe he meant to do it. It was just a careless accident. But the arrow never made it past my body. It struck me hard and deep in my left eye. Straight away, blood poured down my cheek, and I screamed in agony. I spent a couple of days in the hospital before the doctors decided they would have to remove what was left of my eye. Until I was 12, I wore an eye patch. But then, I moved into secondary school. I decided to get my first glass eye to try, and put an end to the pirate jokes. It might sound weird, but I loved my glass eye. And by the time I was 16, and leaving school, I had collected dozens, all different colors and designs. My missing eye stopped being something I tried to hide, and in a strange way, became my kind of signature. Kids would say, "Have you seen the boy with a spiral in his eye?" Or, "Have you seen the lad with an eye like a cat?" I enjoyed this. It allowed me to embrace my injury and make it part of my identity. I carried on collecting glass eyes for many years, always on the lookout for new designs or something different to what I already had. When I was 25, I discovered the dark web. A friend from my Dungeons & Dragons club told me about how he had used it to buy some sort of hallucinogenic. I didn't plan on using the dark web for anything like that. I was just intrigued by the idea of it. Once I was on, I started looking for stores. It was amazing and disgusting. People selling guns, drugs, services, and even other people. It made me feel a little bit ill, knowing I was now a part of this strange, illicit world. I went on one store page which called itself Mr. Bubble's Objects of Trouble, which was the first store I had come across which had a search bar. So I thought, screw it, let's see if they have any. I typed in the words glass eye. I didn't expect anything to come up, and I was rather surprised when a match popped up on my screen. The item was called The Sight of Sin, which was simply a black eye with a small red number 7 on it. It pulled at my fancy, so I decided to buy it. I didn't truly expect it to show up, but 1 week later, a package arrived, and there it was. As customary with all my new eyes, I washed the eye in a solution to make sure it was clean. When washed, I put it in a case with the rest of my eyes and went back to watching television. The next morning, when I woke up, I thought I'd test out the new eye to see if it was a good fit, to check how comfortable it was. It went in with ease and felt absolutely perfect, so I decided to leave it in for the rest of the day. Nothing strange happened at first. It was just my usual daily routine of having breakfast and doing some work on my laptop. But then the doorbell rang. As I opened the door, I immediately knew something wasn't right. I had double vision all of a sudden. There was only one man standing on my front doorstep, trying to sell me solar panels, but I could see him twice. One image of him was completely ordinary. Just a bloke dressed in a suit, holding a brochure, and telling me about how he can save me money and my electricity bill. But the other image, well, it was him, but dressed up as a gimp suit, cracking a whip against the floor lustfully. I don't think I said a word to him. I just stared transfixed by what I was seeing. Eventually, I closed the door and stood there for a moment trying to understand what had just happened. I passed it off at the time as just my mind playing tricks on me, and that I must be overtired. I decided to have a nap. I was woken by a telephone call from my father, asking if I was coming to his house for dinner. I looked at the time and realized I was running late, so I grabbed my coat and flew out the door. On my way to my father's house, which is just a 10-minute walk down the road from mine, I walked past just one person, a lady walking her dog, but again, I was seeing double. In the image, she was completely ordinary. Apart from being overweight, she was wearing a pink coat, and beside her a dog trotted along minding its own business. But in another part of my vision, I could see her again, completely naked, eating tinned dog food with a fork, jellied meat dripping down onto breasts which she licked ravenously. I was almost sick. I thought about just going home and going back to bed, still trying to convince myself I was simply tired from working, but my father missed not having me at home, and I didn't want to let him down, though now I wish I did. Now, what happened next won't make much sense unless I explain something. When I was 2 years old, my mother died. I say died. She was killed whilst walking home from work one night on this very estate. Nobody has ever been caught in relation to her murder, but now I know exactly who took my mother from me. My father opened the door with a large grin on his face. "Come in, son," he said cheerily, but I did not move. Besides the image of my father standing in the doorway was another vision of him holding a knife, and laying beneath him on the floor was my mother, soaked in blood, eyes vacant and still. I took a step back from my father and did not stop running until I had reached the front door of my house. Straight away, I went onto the dark web and searched for Mr. Bubble's store, but it had gone, vanished, like it had never even been there. I didn't leave the house for a few days. I didn't answer the door. I didn't even pick up the phone. What I did was sit by the window looking out onto the street, watching the people walking past. I think I know what I am seeing now. It makes little sense, but it's the only thing I can think of, which almost explains what I am seeing. Firstly, when I remove the glass eye, I no longer see two images of everyone. I only see one, just like I always have. But when the eye is in, I see two visions of every person I look at in the flesh. Secondly, I think I know what I am seeing. I am seeing their sins. I know that sounds utterly mad, but it's the only thing all this seems to point to. The name of the glass eye, the red number 7, and the grotesque and disturbing images I see. I believe it's their sins I am seeing with my new eye. I see the true hideous nature of people, the part of themselves they hide from everyone else. I know I could just take the eye out and forget about it, but I just can't bring myself to do this. I can't trust anybody with it. I can't see the real them, but seeing people's darkest secrets also leaves me alone. For once you see the hidden nature of someone, you never want to be close to them again. Many questions remain. Why does this eye allow me to see these things? Who made it? How did it end up on the dark web? I need to know the answer to these questions. So please, if anyone out there has any information on the eye, or if anyone has ever come across Mr. Bubble's Objects of Terror store, then please get in touch. Please. Having recently moved into our new home, my mother and I weren't used to the layout, and so the beds weren't put in their final destination. At the time, we slept in the same room, but in separate beds with a lamp in the middle. In this circumstance, a couple weeks after we moved in, our backs opposed each other in our twin beds. I laid on my left side facing the wall, and my mother on her right facing the curtain-less sliding glass doors. The room felt gloomy, as if the lightless aura from outside seeped into the room. It all started with a dreamless sleep, when I was somehow awoken with a sound or a touch, but with a feeling. Fear. There was something behind me. It seemed to hover, but have weight not only where it stood, but in the room it now possessed. My every breath was thick and heavy, a struggle in fact. The dark creature seemed to stretch over me, in the entire room. Everything was swallowed in one neat, but slow wave of what seemed like a black hole consuming all light. Yet the creature was somehow darker. I was struck with fear. Whatever this was, it was looking to hurt someone. It didn't want us here. With my back facing it, I felt so vulnerable. Yet, I didn't want to turn. All I wanted was for this to be over. It was driving me insane. I had to turn my wrists ever so slowly to make sure I wasn't in sleep paralysis. I kept finding ways to check if this was real. The smell, sound, feeling. Every time I focused on a sense, it heightened. The fabric of the blanket, the feeling of the pillow, the smell of the sheets, the sound of my breath, the pounding of my heart. It must be real. But I realized something. The fans weren't on anymore. All I could hear was my heart, my mother's breathing, and the ominous, slight, almost non-existent swaying of the black figure between our beds. Still wanting to turn, I checked for shadows, a clue, something. Everywhere I skimmed and scanned, made some weird, terrifying shape. I didn't need to look. I felt like I could see it without looking. I could clearly discern him, since it woke me up, but I could sense a shape. It was something of a tall human-like figure, like a hole in the universe. I was so scared, hidden under my blankets. I wanted to hide forever. He seemed to appear beyond reality. I kept thinking of my mother, what would happen to her, and I kept saying to myself it wasn't real. I wanted to believe. I wanted to look, but I couldn't. I froze. It's not real. It's not real. It's not real. I wanted to look, wanted to be sure, but I didn't want to conflict it. Sometimes the being's waves would get worse, causing me to hold my breath. After exhaling out of my slightly shivering body, through my dried throat, it's as if the figure had a weak but very slow heartbeat. After what seemed like hours in my last resting place, the feeling somehow vanished. The room didn't seem heavy. It was gone. Everything lightened up. I felt at peace. For some reason, I didn't question it. I felt safe, so I must be. I took the words from my mouth to pronounce weakly. Thank God he's gone. It seemed apart from my body, being I was so close to my slumber. The sleep was dreamless, again, but by no means was I upset, for I was safe. The next morning I was eager to tell my mother of my long, terrifying dream, for I wasn't sure anymore. Although I thought of times it felt so real, the fear. I told my mother with great clarity, and she, while drinking her coffee, was so interested, too interested. Her eyes were bulging at the beginning, but later, her lids went back to normal like a cancelled takeoff. Her brown eyes remained fixed on me. After I was done, there was a long silence, and she said to me, "It was the same for me." And she continued to explain the horrible feelings, the weight of the room, the lack of the fans, the feeling of being watched, and so forth. She even said that she heard me say, "Thank God it's gone." At the same time, the feeling washed away for her. At first, I didn't understand. Still wrapping my head around what she said, millions of bumps crawled all over my body, starting from the bottom of my spine to my scalp. She went through it too? What? She said, looking quite pale. Yeah, I didn't want to look either. I was frozen. I felt in danger. He was there. My mother went through that. She had the fear. It wasn't fake. I was smiling. I don't know why. Maybe I had closure from it, proof I wasn't entirely insane. Or that my mind is smarter and trickier than I thought. Maybe I was relieved. I had an experience to, furthermore, bring us closer. But it tore me up to think this thing was real. It could have been a ghost of the past. It's like those moments when you have a feeling in your gut that something isn't right. Something bad is going to happen. But this time, it didn't. My mother and I stayed at bay, after presumably waking up in unison on that fateful night. I don't even want to know, nor imagine what would happen if we ran, or acknowledge it when it was in our presence. Would we be gone? Or safe now, 10 years later? For what I thought was a dream became a true reality, and it makes me think about what's after now, after this life. Let me start out by saying that I'm a firm believer in the paranormal. Whether if it's some sort of afterlife or another dimension entirely, we are far from figuring out the truth. It all started when I got a call from my one friend, inviting me over for a night out with his dorm mate, and our other friend who used to go to our university. Let's call them A, J, and C for the sake of the story. And the place that we were in, I will not be disclosing for the sake of my own privacy. A drove us to the music festival that was in the next city over from ours, and it featured local bands and vendors. We all bought churros, while Jay got a snow cone, and then we walked around for about an hour or so until a few intoxicated people ruined the event. Now, the venue was crawling with cops, and it was at that time that we decided to leave, not wanting to end the night early. A suggested that we should go visit this abandoned insane asylum that was close by. We all agreed since we were kind of hoping for some excitement, besides seeing two drunk people get arrested. As A was driving, Jay all of a sudden screamed at him to stop the car. A quickly slammed the brakes, then Jay opened his door and threw the snow cone out onto the street. He had been holding on to it this whole time and didn't think to use a trash can while we were there. Z called him out, to which Jay defended his actions. Then, A and I joined in, and we all had a good laugh and chalked it up to it being a classic Jay moment. The asylum was located in a wealthy neighborhood where there was neighborhood watch going on 24/7 from surveillance cameras on people's properties. So we parked the car away from the house and the property that the asylum sat on. Now there was a hiking trail near the property, so it wasn't unusual to run into a few hikers. However, it was around midnight, and most of the parks and hiking trails in the area close at sundown. We got up to the front gate, which looked like your typical cliché horror movie iron gates that guarded an old haunted house or something. It was closed off, of course, so we walked up the hill next to the iron fence until we discovered a section of it was taken over by tall grass and weeds, and it had fallen down over the years. We got through with ease, and A said that the asylum was just on top of the hill according to Google Maps. He also asked that one of us should follow the group from behind and be the lookout in case we came across any unwanted attention. It wasn't uncommon to encounter a homeless person, especially this high up in the mountains. Some of them can get very territorial since they made the trip up from the city to get some privacy. I volunteered to be behind, and besides, I wanted to be in control of the light. We made our way to the main dirt road, and Jay was already starting to complain about the hill and how we didn't have the right shoes. Eventually, we grew tired of hearing this and tried changing the subject and started to talk about the latest Avengers movie that was coming out next year. At this point, we had transitioned from the dirt road to an unkept paved road with weeds and grass overtaking it. Jay felt a little bit better, but shortly after, started up again because I wasn't using my phone's flashlight. I told him that it wasn't really needed, since the moonlight gave us enough to see the road. Keep in mind that the moon was a few days away from being full. Plus, I didn't want to be the guy to get us caught for trespassing. Jay didn't like that answer, so he got out his own flashlight and traded places with me. I was okay with it. I didn't doubt anyone in our group wouldn't be able to run fast if the situation came up. Everything was fine until we reached this area that appeared to be a cul-de-sac of some sort. The road and sidewalk had weeds and grass flowing through the cracks just like the road coming up. There were concrete stairs, some of them led to nowhere, while others connected to a giant concrete foundation for a house. The street even had street lamps, but none of them were on. It was as if people gave up on constructing this neighborhood. After a bit of exploring, the four of us made our way farther up the hill where the insane asylum was located, but there was nothing. In the spot where the asylum is supposed to be is what I can best describe as a massive above-ground swimming pool with a tarp over it. It was probably a storage or utility silo of some sort. We walked around it, thinking that the asylum was the other side of it, but again, there was nothing. Despite our disappointment, we decided to make the best of the situation and enjoy the view of the city, as well as snap some pictures to capture the moment. I pulled out my phone to take some pictures as well, then saw that my battery was low. Funny, I thought. I only used 40% of it today, and it was fully charged this morning. Now it's saying that it's at 15%. After chilling out for a bit, A said that we should get going. Right before we went back around the silo, we bumped into another group of people. Turns out, they were from another college that was in the area, and they were looking for the asylum as well. After talking with them for a bit, we decided to part ways when one of them asked us if we had seen any hikers when we came in. We said no, and told them that we were the only ones out here. Well, they said there were some people trying to climb the side of the mountain that's right next to the road. They also mentioned that they came from the hiking trail and didn't encounter them until they made their way up from where we were. Who could possibly be out here this late at night scaling a mountain? We told them that we'll keep an eye out, and thanked them, and went on our way down to the cul-de-sac. Right before we made it down there, sure enough we saw what looked to be 3 giant headlamps scaling the mountainside. 2 of them to be following a trail of sorts, while the other one making their way straight up the mountain itself. It was the weirdest thing. Then Jay decided to pull out his phone flashlight again, but this time he shined it over to their direction. He shouted something like, "Hey, how's the view from up there?" Then the whole mountain lit up with a few dozen of these lights. It was so bright, It looked like daytime. Then, we saw a large cluster of them make their way down the mountain and toward our direction. We could hear a few people shouting at us, but we weren't going to stick around to see what they wanted from us. As we booked it past the cul-de-sac, I looked behind me and saw this shadowy outline of a person behind a tree. The head and most of its body was there, but I couldn't make out any distinct features, like their nose, hair, or fingers. Just then the cul-de-sac was becoming flooded with light. All of us picked up our pace, and quickly made it down the road toward the crumbled fence. We had finally reached the front gate, and we managed to startle the two teenagers who were stoned out of their mind. Before they could say anything, Jay said, "Well, aren't you the cool kids?" As you can already tell, Jay never lets up. We stopped for a moment to catch our breath before we get to A's car. I looked back through the gate to see that the lights were now scattered all over the property. They were probably looking for us, thinking that we might have split up or something. We told the teens that they should leave the property as well, but after Jay's comment, they just ignored us, so we got out of there. A dropped C off at his house, then Jay, A, and I went to get food, and went back to our dorms. Now this is the part of the story where people would say that they wish it ended there, and I wish my story ended like this too. About a few days go by, and I'm up late trying to get a project done. I have my window and blinds open since the weather was nice out. I'm sitting at my desk and notice something out of the corner of my eye. I turn my head to look out of the window and nothing was there. Now keep in mind that my dorm complex is located in the center of our campus, so I'm used to seeing heavy foot traffic during the day, but at night, it's usually a ghost town besides the occasional security guard doing their patrol. One such security guard, who looks like an old grandpa, gets his flashlight and usually looks through the bushes and shrubs to see if there's anything lurking about. I didn't see him this time, nor his golf cart, so I shrugged and went back to work. A few minutes go by, and I see something again, or I thought I did. That is until I looked behind the tree that's directly across from my dorm, and I saw that same shadowy figure. It was looking right up into my window. I quickly got up to shut my blinds and turned off all the lights besides my computer monitor and just sat there in the dark. Perhaps I was just imagining it due to my lack of sleep, and it wasn't unusual for me to hallucinate and see things that aren't there when I've been up for a while. Another few days go by, and I got lunch to go at my school's cafe. And when I got to my dorm complex, I put my food down, then reached into my pocket to fish out my keys. As I'm doing this, I saw something standing to my left. I looked up and thought it was one of my friends or a classmate. It wasn't. In fact, it was the shadow figure again, but this time it was in broad daylight. It seemed like time stood still, and there was no one else around but me and this entity. I grabbed my keys, opened the door, and tossed my food into the hall, then quickly got in and closed the door behind me. I was terrified at this point. This entity wasn't afraid to show itself to me. What could it possibly want from me? I knew at this point, this thing had to be real. I went to sleep, and now it's appearing even in the daylight. I went to one afternoon class, and after it let out, I ran into A. He had dark circles around his eyes, and he looked extremely pale. It wasn't even midterms yet, and he looked awful. I asked him, "Hey, A, are you doing alright?" He cut me off and said that he was fine, all without looking at me. Then I said, "Have you seen the shadow person?" He froze, looked at me, and said, "You see him too?" I thought I was the only one. I told Jay this, and he thinks I'm nuts or something. I told him about my experiences with it. Then he told me that he's been having nightmares, and would sometimes see him in the corner of his room, or outside of his hall. I called C up later in the week, and asked if he's seen anything. He said no, and asked if I remember the time when I was in the dorm complex that A and J are currently living in. It was him, A, and I. We were up late one night and heard a little girl screaming, only to find out that there wasn't a little girl, since it was the weekend and most people were gone, so it might have been a ghost. I said yeah, and it wasn't that, but I was aware of other paranormal occurrences going on, since most of our campus is haunted, and it wasn't any of those either. He offered his place for A or I to stay in, and I thanked him, and that was that. About a year later, A graduated. Well, I moved back home, and neither one of us brought it up again. In fact, I haven't seen it since I talked to A and C about it. I told both my parents this story. My dad told me that those lights were way too big and bright for a normal person to own. There are only two people that are permitted to have them, which is the film industry and the military. If they were the military, what would they be doing up there? As for the asylum, it was torn down the year prior to us going there, and it was said to be haunted even when it was in service back in the day. So did my friend, and I experienced some kind of crazed inmate that died in the asylum. The reason why I'm writing this now is because a few nights ago, while I was trying to fall asleep, I saw it standing in the doorway of my room. If you guys have any advice on how to get rid of it, please tell me. I don't know when I'm going to encounter it next.